Question 1. To address the challenge of a medical device manufacturer proposing risk control measures for a novel implantable device that are based on general industry best practices rather than specific validation data for the unique material composition and intended use, what is the most appropriate auditor action? Option A. Require the manufacturer to provide specific validation data demonstrating the effectiveness of the proposed risk control measures in mitigating the identified risks associated with the device's unique characteristics. Option B. Recommend that the risk control measures be implemented and their effectiveness monitored through post-market surveillance. Option C. Accept the proposed risk control measures based on the manufacturer's assurance that they are standard practice for similar implantable devices. Option D. Approve the risk control measures, assuming that any potential issues will be addressed through future design iterations. The correct answer is A. Require the manufacturer to provide specific validation data demonstrating the effectiveness of the proposed risk control measures in mitigating the identified risks associated with the device's unique characteristics. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the auditor to balance the immediate need for a product to reach the market with the imperative to ensure patient safety through robust risk control. The pressure to release a device, especially if it addresses a critical unmet need, can lead to a temptation to accept less rigorous evidence for risk mitigation. The auditor must exercise independent judgment, critically evaluate the manufacturer's rationale, and avoid being swayed by commercial pressures or incomplete data. The challenge lies in discerning whether the proposed risk control measures are truly effective and adequately validated, or merely a superficial attempt to satisfy regulatory requirements. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes patient safety and regulatory compliance by demanding objective evidence of the effectiveness of the proposed risk control measures. This aligns with the fundamental principles of medical device regulation, which place the onus on the manufacturer to demonstrate that the residual risks are acceptable when weighed against the intended benefits. The requirement for validation data, clinical evidence, or robust justification ensures that the risk control measures are not theoretical but have been proven to work in practice. This proactive stance prevents potentially harmful devices from reaching the market and upholds the integrity of the regulatory system. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves accepting the manufacturer's assurance without independent verification. This is a significant regulatory failure, as it bypasses the auditor's core responsibility to critically assess evidence. Ethically, it compromises patient safety by relying on unsubstantiated claims. This approach demonstrates a lack of due diligence and an abdication of professional responsibility. Another incorrect approach is to approve the risk control measures based solely on their perceived intuitiveness or common use in similar devices. Prior experience is valuable. It does not substitute for specific validation for the current device and its unique risk profile. This can lead to regulatory failure if the proposed measures are insufficient for the specific hazards associated with the new device, potentially exposing patients to unforeseen risks. A third incorrect approach is to defer the evaluation of the risk control measures to a later stage, such as post-market surveillance. While post-market data is crucial, it is not a substitute for pre-market risk assessment and control. Delaying this evaluation is a regulatory failure because it allows a device with potentially unmitigated risks to be released. Ethically, it places the burden of identifying and rectifying potential harm onto the patient or healthcare provider after the fact, which is unacceptable. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this situation by first understanding the specific risks identified for the medical device. They must then critically evaluate the proposed risk control measures, demanding objective evidence of their effectiveness. This evidence could include design verification, validation testing, biocompatibility data, usability studies, or clinical data, depending on the nature of the risk. If the evidence is insufficient or the justification is weak, the auditor must request further information or require modifications to the risk control measures. The decision-making process should be guided by a risk-based approach, prioritizing the most significant hazards and ensuring that all residual risks are acceptable. Maintaining professional skepticism and independence from commercial pressures is paramount. Question 2. The efficiency study reveals a significant delay in the medical device complaint resolution process, primarily due to a backlog in the initial review stage. Which of the following actions best addresses this issue while adhering to regulatory requirements for quality management systems? Option A. Conduct a thorough root cause analysis of the complaint review backlog to identify underlying process inefficiencies and implement targeted corrective actions. Option B. Expedite complaint processing by skipping certain documentation steps in the review phase. Option C. Implement a system to prioritize complaints based on subjective assessment of their urgency by the complaint handling team. Option D. Immediately hire additional personnel to process complaints without investigating the reasons for the current backlog. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough root cause analysis of the complaint review backlog to identify underlying process inefficiencies and implement targeted corrective actions. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a bottleneck in the complaint handling process, leading to extended resolution times. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts patient safety and regulatory compliance. Delays in addressing complaints can mean that a potentially hazardous product remains on the market longer, increasing the risk to users. Furthermore, regulatory bodies, such as the FDA in the U.S., have strict requirements for complaint handling timelines and thorough investigations. Auditors must balance the need for efficiency with the imperative to maintain robust quality systems that protect public health. The correct approach, focusing on root cause analysis and implementing targeted corrective actions, represents best professional practice. This aligns with the principles of quality management systems, QMS, as mandated by regulations like the U.S. FDA's 21 CFR Part 820 Quality System Regulation. Specifically, Section 820.198, Complaint Handling, requires manufacturers to establish and maintain procedures for receiving, reviewing, and evaluating complaints. Root cause analysis ensures that the underlying issues causing the bottleneck are identified and addressed, preventing recurrence and improving the overall effectiveness of the QMS. This proactive approach demonstrates a commitment to continuous improvement and regulatory adherence. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on increasing the number of personnel without understanding the root cause of the bottleneck is professionally unacceptable. This superficial fix fails to address the systemic issues, potentially leading to increased costs without a commensurate improvement in complaint resolution quality or timeliness. It also risks masking underlying process inefficiencies, which could lead to more significant problems down the line and potential regulatory noncompliance with the requirement for effective complaint handling. Another incorrect approach, which involves bypassing certain documentation steps to expedite processing, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This directly violates the principles of good documentation practices and the traceability requirements inherent in a QMS. Such actions undermine the integrity of the complaint handling system, making it impossible to demonstrate compliance during an audit and potentially leading to severe regulatory actions. It also compromises the ability to learn from complaints and implement necessary product or process improvements. A third incorrect approach, which involves prioritizing complaints based on perceived severity without a defined, documented, and validated risk-based system, is also professionally unsound. While risk assessment is crucial, it must be integrated into a formal QMS. Arbitrary prioritization can lead to overlooking critical issues or failing to meet regulatory timelines for certain complaint types. This approach lacks the systematic rigor required by regulations and can result in inconsistent and potentially unsafe outcomes. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. 1. Understand the problem. Clearly define the bottleneck and its impact. 2. Investigate the root cause. Utilize tools like Ishikawa diagrams, 5 whys, or process mapping to identify underlying issues. 3. Evaluate potential solutions. Consider a range of corrective and preventive actions, CAPA. 4. Assess solutions against regulatory requirements and QMS principles. Ensure proposed solutions are compliant, effective, and sustainable. 5. Implement and monitor. Put the chosen solution into practice and track its effectiveness. 6. Document all actions. Maintain thorough records for auditability and continuous improvement. Question 3. Stakeholder feedback indicates a desire to expedite the global launch of a novel medical device. The product has successfully obtained FDA clearance in the United States. To facilitate a rapid expansion into the European Union and other key international markets, the company is considering leveraging the FDA clearance as the primary basis for all subsequent regulatory submissions, with a minimal focus on the specific requirements of the EMA and other national competent authorities, beyond ensuring ISO 13485 certification is maintained. Which of the following approaches best addresses the regulatory complexities of this situation? Option A. Focus solely on meeting the requirements of ISO 13485, as this international standard is universally recognized and accepted by all regulatory bodies, thereby eliminating the need for separate submissions to the FDA, EMA, or other national authorities. Option B. Assume that FDA clearance, due to its rigor, is largely equivalent to the requirements of other major regulatory bodies, and proceed with a streamlined submission process for the EU and other markets, primarily relying on the existing FDA documentation and ISO 13485 certification. Option C. Develop a comprehensive, jurisdiction-specific regulatory strategy for each target market, recognizing that, while ISO 13485 provides a foundational quality management system, it does not replace the need for specific market authorization processes with bodies like the EMA and other national competent authorities. Option D. Prioritize obtaining CE marking for the European Union market first, as this is often perceived as a more stringent process than FDA clearance, and then use the CE marking documentation as the primary basis for submissions to other international regulatory bodies, including the FDA. Correct answer is C. Develop a comprehensive, jurisdiction-specific regulatory strategy for each target market, recognizing that, while ISO 13485 provides a foundational quality management system, it does not replace the need for specific market authorization processes with bodies like the EMA and other national competent authorities. Explanation: this scenario presents a common challenge in the medical device industry, navigating the complexities of international regulatory requirements when seeking to market a product globally. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need for efficient market access with the imperative of strict regulatory compliance across diverse jurisdictions. A medical device manufacturer must understand that, while some regulatory principles are harmonized, through ISO standards, the specific requirements and interpretations of regulatory bodies like the FDA and EMA can differ significantly. This necessitates a nuanced approach that avoids oversimplification or the assumption of universal applicability of any single regulatory framework. The correct approach involves a comprehensive, jurisdiction-specific regulatory strategy. This means actively engaging with the requirements of each target market, understanding the nuances of their respective regulatory bodies, FDA for the US, EMA for the EU, and other national competent authorities, and recognizing the role of international standards like ISO 13485 as a foundation for quality management systems, but not a substitute for specific market authorization processes. This approach ensures that the device meets the safety and efficacy standards mandated by each regulatory authority, minimizing the risk of market rejection, recalls, or legal repercussions. It demonstrates a commitment to patient safety and product quality, which are paramount in the medical device sector. An incorrect approach would be to assume that compliance with one major regulatory body, such as the FDA, automatically satisfies the requirements of another, like the EMA, or vice versa. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Each regulatory body has its own specific submission requirements, review processes, and post-market surveillance obligations. For instance, the FDA's pre-market approval (PMA) or 510(k) pathways are distinct from the EMA's CE marking process under the Medical Device Regulation (MDR). Relying solely on one jurisdiction's approval demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the legal and safety mandates of other markets, potentially exposing patients to unsafe devices and the company to severe penalties. Another incorrect approach is to view ISO standards as a complete regulatory solution. While ISO 13485 is a critical standard for medical device quality management systems and is recognized globally, it does not grant market authorization. It provides a framework for a QMS that helps ensure compliance with applicable regulations, but it does not replace the need for specific product registrations, submissions, and approvals required by national or regional regulatory bodies. Failing to pursue these specific market authorizations based on an over-reliance on ISO certification is a failure to comply with the law. The professional decision-making process for such situations should involve a systematic assessment of target markets, followed by in-depth research into the specific regulatory requirements of each. This includes understanding the classification of the device in each jurisdiction, the necessary documentation for submission, the applicable conformity assessment procedures, and any post-market surveillance obligations. Engaging with regulatory consultants or legal counsel specializing in international medical device regulations can be invaluable. A proactive, market-by-market approach, grounded in a thorough understanding of each regulatory body's unique framework, is essential for successful and compliant global market access. Question 4. Market research demonstrates that audit findings related to the effectiveness of corrective actions are a frequent area of contention. Following an audit of a medical device manufacturer's COPPA system, an auditor identified a nonconformity regarding the lack of documented verification of the effectiveness of implemented corrective actions. The auditee responded by stating they have initiated a review of all open COPPA to ensure effectiveness and provided a general timeline for completion. Which of the following represents the most appropriate auditor response to ensure regulatory compliance and effective follow-up? Option A. Accept the auditee's statement of initiating a review and await their completion of the general timeline before further action. Option B. Immediately issue a formal noncompliance report to the regulatory authority based on the auditee's insufficient response. Option C. Request specific, objective evidence demonstrating that the implemented corrective actions for the identified nonconformity have been verified as effective in preventing recurrence and that the root cause has been addressed. Option D. Acknowledge the auditee's commitment to review and consider the finding closed, assuming the review will confirm effectiveness. Correct answer is C. Request specific, objective evidence demonstrating that the implemented corrective actions for the identified nonconformity have been verified as effective in preventing recurrence and that the root cause has been addressed. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device auditing, balancing the need for timely corrective action with the thoroughness required for effective audit follow-up. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate level of detail and evidence needed to close out audit findings, particularly when the auditee proposes a plan that appears superficially adequate but may not address the root cause. Professional judgment is crucial to avoid premature closure that could leave systemic issues unaddressed, or conversely, to avoid unnecessarily prolonging the process, which can strain auditor-auditee relationships and delay improvements. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the integrity of the quality management system and patient safety. By requiring specific, objective evidence demonstrating the effectiveness of the implemented corrective actions and verification that the root cause has been addressed, the auditor ensures that the findings are truly resolved and not merely superficially managed. This aligns with the principles of ISO 13485, 2016, which mandates effective corrective and preventive actions, COPPA, and requires verification of the effectiveness of actions taken. Ethically, this approach upholds the auditor's responsibility to provide an objective assessment and ensure compliance with regulatory requirements, thereby protecting public health. An incorrect approach that accepts a vague commitment to future action without evidence of implementation or effectiveness fails to meet the requirements for COPPA verification. This represents a regulatory failure because it bypasses the mandated process for ensuring that nonconformities are resolved and do not recur. Ethically, it is a failure of due diligence, potentially allowing a noncompliant system to persist, which could lead to patient harm. Another incorrect approach, which is to immediately escalate to a formal noncompliance report without first allowing the auditee a reasonable opportunity to provide the requested evidence, can be professionally detrimental. While thoroughness is important, an overly rigid or punitive initial response can damage the collaborative aspect of auditing and may not be proportionate to the situation if the auditee is genuinely working towards resolution. This could be seen as a failure in professional communication and relationship management, though not necessarily a direct regulatory violation if the underlying issue remains unresolved. However, it misses the opportunity for a more constructive resolution. A third incorrect approach, accepting a superficial fix that only addresses the immediate symptom without investigating the underlying root cause is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This directly contravenes the principles of COPPA, which demand root cause analysis. By not addressing the root cause, the nonconformity is likely to recur, posing a continued risk to product quality and patient safety. This demonstrates a lack of critical thinking and a failure to uphold the auditor's responsibility to ensure systemic improvements. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the audit scope and objectives, a thorough review of the initial audit findings, and the auditee's proposed COPPA. It requires open communication with the auditee to clarify expectations regarding the type and level of evidence required for verification. When evaluating COPPA, auditors should ask, has the root cause been identified? Have effective actions been implemented to address the root cause? Has the effectiveness of these actions been verified? If the auditee's response is insufficient, the auditor should clearly articulate what additional evidence or actions are needed, providing a reasonable timeframe for submission before considering further escalation. Question 5. Consider a scenario where you are auditing a medical device manufacturer's complaint handling process. You are interviewing the quality manager, who is under significant time pressure due to an upcoming product launch. You need to understand their process for investigating complaints, identifying root causes, and implementing corrective actions. Which interviewing technique would be most effective in gathering comprehensive and accurate information, while respecting the quality manager's time constraints and fostering a collaborative audit environment? Option A. Focus on asking a series of yes/no questions to quickly confirm adherence to documented procedures. Option B. Interrupt the quality manager frequently to ensure all your specific questions are answered immediately, regardless of their flow of thought. Option C. Primarily use open-ended questions, allowing the quality manager to explain their processes in detail, and use follow-up probing questions to clarify specific points while being mindful of their time. Option D. Present the quality manager with a predetermined set of conclusions about their complaint handling process and ask them to confirm them. The correct answer is C. Primarily use open-ended questions, allowing the quality manager to explain their processes in detail and use follow-up probing questions to clarify specific points while being mindful of their time. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for medical device auditors, balancing the need to gather comprehensive information with the ethical and regulatory imperative to respect the auditee's time and professional boundaries. The auditee is a busy quality manager responsible for a critical aspect of the quality management system, QMS. An auditor's primary objective is to verify compliance with applicable regulations and standards. In this context, the challenge lies in conducting an effective interview that elicits necessary evidence without causing undue disruption or appearing confrontational, which could lead to incomplete or guarded responses. Careful judgment is required to select an interviewing technique that maximizes information gain while maintaining a professional and collaborative atmosphere. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves employing open-ended questions that encourage detailed responses and allow the auditee to elaborate on their processes and understanding. This technique, often referred to as probing, is crucial for uncovering the how and why behind documented procedures and actual practices. By starting broad and then narrowing down based on the auditee's responses, the auditor can gain a deeper insight into the effectiveness of the QMS. This aligns with the principles of ISO 13485 and relevant FDA regulations, e.g., 21 CFR Part 820, which require auditors to assess the implementation and effectiveness of quality system processes, not just the existence of documentation. This method fosters a more transparent and informative exchange, leading to a more accurate audit outcome. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that relies solely on yes/no questions or leading questions is problematic. Yes/no questions limit the scope of the auditee's response, preventing the auditor from understanding the nuances of their work and potentially missing critical deviations. Leading questions, which suggest a desired answer, can bias the auditee's responses, leading to inaccurate information and undermining the integrity of the audit. This violates the principle of objective evidence gathering mandated by auditing standards and regulatory requirements. Furthermore, an approach that involves interrupting the auditee frequently or dominating the conversation can create an adversarial environment. This can make the auditee defensive, less forthcoming, and ultimately hinder the auditor's ability to obtain a complete picture of the QMS. Such behavior can be perceived as unprofessional and disrespectful, potentially impacting the auditor's credibility and the overall audit relationship. Professional reasoning. When conducting interviews, auditors should adopt a structured yet flexible approach. Begin by clearly stating the purpose of the interview and the topics to be covered. Utilize open-ended questions to encourage detailed explanations. Listen actively and attentively, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. Be prepared to probe deeper into areas where information is unclear or appears inconsistent. Maintain a neutral and objective demeanor, avoiding judgmental language or assumptions. If the auditee becomes defensive or evasive, consider rephrasing questions or taking a short break. The goal is to facilitate a productive dialogue that yields objective evidence of compliance and identifies areas for improvement. Question 6. The investigation demonstrates that a critical batch record for a medical device is missing several key entries related to in-process testing results and final product release signatures. The production manager is pressuring the quality assurance auditor to approve the batch for release to meet a critical customer deadline, suggesting that the missing information can be added retrospectively after shipment. What is the most appropriate course of action for the quality assurance auditor in this situation, adhering strictly to the regulatory framework for medical device quality management systems? Option A. Expedite the batch release by overlooking the missing documentation to avoid disrupting the production schedule and to meet the customer deadline. Option B. Refuse to approve the batch release until all required documentation is accurately and contemporaneously completed and reviewed according to the QMS procedures and applicable regulations. Option C. Advise the production manager to verbally confirm the missing data and proceed with the release, documenting this verbal confirmation in the batch record. Option D. Approve the batch release with a note indicating that the missing documentation will be added later, trusting the production manager's assurance. The correct answer is B. Refuse to approve the batch release until all required documentation is accurately and contemporaneously completed and reviewed according to the QMS procedures and applicable regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the conflict between immediate operational needs and the long-term integrity of the quality management system, QMS, documentation. The auditor must balance the need to facilitate product release with the regulatory imperative to maintain accurate and complete records. The core of the challenge lies in upholding the principles of good documentation practices, GDP, as mandated by regulatory frameworks, which are foundational to medical device safety and effectiveness. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to the established QMS and regulatory requirements for documentation. Specifically, it upholds the principle that all QMS records must be accurate, complete, legible, contemporaneous, attributable, and original Alcoa Plus principles, which are implicitly or explicitly required by medical device regulations. By insisting on the proper completion and review of the batch record before release, the auditor ensures that the device meets all quality specifications and that the company can demonstrate compliance during future audits or investigations. This proactive stance prevents potential noncompliance issues, protects patient safety, and maintains the company's reputation. An incorrect approach that involves releasing the product without the complete batch record would represent a significant regulatory failure. This action bypasses critical quality control steps and violates the principle of documented evidence, central to QMS audits. It creates a gap in the traceability of the device, making it impossible to verify its compliance with specifications or to investigate any potential issues that may arise post-market. Ethically, it compromises patient safety by allowing a product to enter the market without full assurance of its quality. Another incorrect approach, such as accepting a verbal assurance that the missing information will be added later, also fails to meet regulatory expectations. While it might seem like a pragmatic solution to expedite release, it lacks the necessary documented evidence. Verbal assurances are not auditable records and do not fulfill the requirement for contemporaneous documentation. This approach undermines the integrity of the QMS and exposes the company to regulatory scrutiny. A third incorrect approach, which is to overlook the missing documentation to avoid conflict with production, is a direct abdication of the auditor's responsibility. This prioritizes expediency over compliance and patient safety. It signals a lack of commitment to the QMS and can foster a culture of non-compliance within the organization. This approach is ethically unsound and poses a severe risk to the company's regulatory standing and the public's trust. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the relevant regulatory requirements for documentation and record-keeping. Auditors must be empowered to enforce these requirements without undue pressure. When faced with such a dilemma, the auditor should 1. Identify the specific documentation requirement that is not met. 2. Refer to the relevant sections of the QMS and applicable regulations, e.g., 21 CFR Part 820 in the U.S. or MDR in the EU, depending on the specified jurisdiction for the CMDA exam. 3. Clearly communicate the deficiency and its implications to the responsible parties. 4. Propose a corrective action that brings the documentation into compliance before proceeding with the product release. 5. Escalate the issue if necessary, following established company procedures, to ensure that compliance is achieved. Question 7. Upon reviewing the manufacturing process for a critical medical device, you observe that the assembly team is consistently deviating from a key step outlined in the approved work instruction, Y123. The deviation appears to be a shortcut that the team believes saves time without impacting product quality. However, the WI-123 is a controlled document, and deviations must be formally managed. What is the most appropriate immediate action for a certified medical device auditor to take in this situation? Option A. Immediately stop the production line until the team can demonstrate strict adherence to WI-123, as any deviation from a controlled document is unacceptable. Option B. Advise the assembly team to follow the work instruction precisely from now on and assume they will comply, without further documentation or follow-up, to maintain good working relationships. Option C. Make a note of the deviation in your audit report for senior management to address at their discretion, but do not interfere with the ongoing production to avoid disruption. Option D. Document the observed deviation, discuss it with the production supervisor to understand the reasons for the non-compliance, and initiate the process for corrective action according to the quality system regulation. The correct answer is D. Document the observed deviation, discuss it with the production supervisor to understand the reasons for the non-compliance, and initiate the process for corrective action according to the quality system regulation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents an ethical dilemma for a certified medical device auditor, CMDA, where a conflict arises between the need for accurate documentation and the desire to avoid disrupting ongoing production. The auditor discovers a discrepancy between a documented procedure and the actual practice on the manufacturing floor. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires the auditor to balance their regulatory obligation to ensure compliance with the potential impact of their findings on production schedules and company morale. A hasty or overly lenient approach could compromise product safety and regulatory adherence, while an overly aggressive approach might be perceived as unconstructive and damage professional relationships. Careful judgment is required to determine the most appropriate course of action that upholds regulatory standards while fostering a culture of continuous improvement. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediately documenting the observed deviation and initiating a discussion with the relevant personnel to understand the root cause and implement corrective actions. This aligns with the fundamental principles of quality management systems as mandated by regulatory frameworks such as the U.S. FDA's Quality System Regulation, 21 CFR Part 820. Specifically, 21 CFR 820, 40 Document Controls, and 21 CFR 820, 100 Corrective and Preventive Action require that procedures be followed and that deviations be identified, documented, and addressed. By raising the issue promptly and collaboratively seeking a solution, the auditor upholds their professional responsibility to ensure product quality and patient safety, while also promoting a proactive approach to quality management within the organization. This demonstrates adherence to the CMDA ethical obligation to act with integrity and diligence. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to overlook the discrepancy to avoid causing delays or conflict. This is a significant regulatory failure because it violates the requirement for accurate and followed procedures. By not documenting or addressing the deviation, the auditor fails to ensure compliance with 21 CFR 820, 40 and 21 CFR 820, 100, potentially allowing a non-conforming process to continue, which could lead to product defects and patient harm. Ethically, this is a breach of the auditor's duty to uphold quality and safety standards. Another incorrect approach is to immediately halt production and demand an instant fix without understanding the context. While addressing the deviation is crucial, this approach lacks professional judgment and can be counterproductive. It fails to recognize the importance of root cause analysis as outlined in 21 CFR 820, 100. Without understanding why the procedure is not being followed, a superficial fix might be implemented, failing to prevent recurrence. This approach can also create unnecessary friction and undermine the collaborative spirit essential for effective quality management. A third incorrect approach is to simply report the finding to senior management without engaging with the production team or seeking immediate corrective action. While reporting is part of the auditor's role, bypassing direct engagement with the operational level misses an opportunity for immediate problem-solving and learning. This approach might not fully satisfy the requirements for timely corrective and preventive actions under 21 CFR 820, 100 and can be perceived as an adversarial tactic rather than a collaborative effort to improve quality. Professional reasoning. When faced with such a situation, a professional auditor should follow a structured decision-making process. First, they must clearly identify the deviation from the documented procedure. Second, they should gather objective evidence of this deviation. Third, they must assess the potential impact of the deviation on product quality and patient safety. Fourth, they should consult the relevant regulatory requirements and internal procedures. Fifth, they should engage with the responsible personnel to understand the circumstances and collaboratively determine the root cause. Finally, they should ensure that appropriate corrective and preventive actions are documented and implemented, and that the effectiveness of these actions is verified. This systematic approach ensures that regulatory compliance is maintained, product safety is prioritized, and a culture of continuous improvement is fostered. Question 8. The monitoring system demonstrates that key process parameters are consistently within acceptable statistical ranges, but the raw data logs are archived on a separate, less accessible server and are not directly linked to the summary reports presented to management and auditors. Option A. The system is compliant because the summary reports are generated by validated software, which inherently ensures the accuracy of the underlying data. Option B. The system is acceptable because the archived raw data can be retrieved upon specific request, fulfilling the requirement for record retention. Option C. The system is compliant as long as the summary reports indicate adherence to specifications, as this demonstrates effective process control. Option D. The system requires immediate remediation to ensure that raw data is readily accessible and linked to summary reports, allowing for complete verification of process performance and compliance with 21 CFR Part 820. The correct answer is C. The system is compliant as long as the summary reports indicate adherence to specifications, as this demonstrates effective process control. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device quality systems, balancing the need for efficient data collection with the regulatory requirement for thoroughness and accuracy. The professional challenge lies in interpreting the intent of 21 CFR Part 820, specifically the requirements for monitoring and control of processes, and ensuring that the chosen method of data presentation does not obscure critical information or lead to misinterpretation. The auditor must assess whether the current system, while seemingly efficient, truly provides the necessary oversight to ensure product quality and safety as mandated by the FDA. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the potential for oversight by ensuring that the raw data, or a representation that preserves its integrity, is readily available for review. This aligns with 21 CFR 820, 75. Which requires that processes where the results cannot be fully verified by subsequent inspection and test shall be validated with a high degree of assurance that the process will consistently produce a product meeting its design and intended use. While not directly about data presentation, the underlying principle is ensuring that the process, in this case, data monitoring, is robust and verifiable. Furthermore, 21 CFR 820, 186, Device History Record, and 21 CFR 820, 184, Device Master Record, imply the need for accessible and complete records that can be audited. Presenting summarized data without easy access to the underlying details can hinder the auditor's ability to perform a thorough assessment and verify compliance. An incorrect approach that relies solely on aggregated statistical summaries without readily accessible raw data fails to meet the spirit and intent of 21 CFR Part 820. This can lead to regulatory noncompliance because it may obscure deviations or trends that are not apparent in the aggregated data, thereby preventing timely corrective and preventive actions. Ethically, it can be seen as an attempt to present a more favorable picture than reality, potentially compromising patient safety. Another incorrect approach that involves manual compilation of data from disparate sources without a clear audit trail or validation of the compilation process introduces significant risk of error and omission. This violates the principles of accurate record keeping and traceability required by 21 CFR 820, 180, General Administrative Controls, and 21 CFR 820, 184. The lack of a validated process for data aggregation means the resulting information cannot be reliably used to demonstrate compliance or to make informed decisions about product quality. A third incorrect approach that focuses on presenting only data that meets predefined acceptable limits, without any mechanism to capture or report excursions, is a direct violation of the principles of process monitoring and control. 21 CFR 820, 70, Production and Process Controls, requires that processes be controlled to ensure that specifications are met. This includes monitoring processes for deviations. Hiding or ignoring data that falls outside acceptable parameters prevent the identification of potential issues and the implementation of necessary corrective actions, thereby failing to ensure the consistent quality of the device. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a critical evaluation of how data is collected, stored, and presented. Auditors should always ask, does this method of presentation allow for a complete and accurate understanding of the process and its output? The focus should be on verifiability, traceability, and the ability to detect deviations. When in doubt, erring on the side of providing more detailed, accessible information is generally the best practice to ensure robust compliance with 21 CFR Part 820. Question 9. Examination of the data shows a pattern of minor deviations from the documented quality management system procedures during the manufacturing of a Class Roman II medical device. While these deviations have not yet resulted in any reported adverse events, the auditor recognizes that if left unaddressed, they could potentially compromise the device's sterility assurance. The auditor also notes that the auditee's quality manager, who is aware of these deviations, has expressed concern about the potential for significant delays in product release if formal nonconformities are issued. Which of the following actions best represent the auditor's professional responsibility in this situation? Option A. Discuss the potential impact of the deviations with the quality manager and suggest they implement minor procedural adjustments internally without formal reporting to avoid delays in product release. Option B. Document all observed deviations thoroughly, assess their potential impact on device safety and regulatory compliance, and report them through the established audit reporting channels, recommending appropriate corrective actions. Option C. Directly inform the regulatory body of the potential risks associated with the deviations, bypassing the manufacturer's internal quality system and the audit reporting process. Option D. Focus the audit report on the areas where the company is compliant, and only briefly mention the observed deviations as minor procedural inconsistencies that do not warrant immediate corrective action. Correct answer is B. Document all observed deviations thoroughly, assess their potential impact on device safety and regulatory compliance, and report them through the established audit reporting channels, recommending appropriate corrective actions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the conflict between the auditor's duty to report findings accurately and impartially, and the potential for personal or organizational repercussions. The auditor must navigate the ethical imperative of upholding regulatory compliance against the pressure to overlook or downplay nonconformities. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the audit remains objective and that all findings are documented and communicated appropriately, regardless of their potential impact. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes integrity and adherence to the regulatory framework. By thoroughly documenting the observed deviations and escalating them through the appropriate channels, the auditor fulfills their responsibility to identify and report noncompliance. This aligns with the fundamental principles of auditing, which demand objectivity, honesty, and a commitment to regulatory standards. Specifically, in the context of medical device auditing, this ensures patient safety and product efficacy by prompting corrective actions for identified risks. An incorrect approach that involves overlooking or minimizing the observed deviations would be a direct violation of auditing principles and ethical conduct. This failure to report nonconformities undermines the purpose of the audit, which is to ensure compliance with regulations such as those established by the FDA, assuming U.S. jurisdiction for CMDA. Such an omission could lead to continued distribution of noncompliant devices, posing risks to patients and potentially resulting in severe regulatory penalties for the manufacturer. Another incorrect approach, such as confronting the auditee directly without proper documentation or adherence to established reporting protocols, could lead to misinterpretation, defensiveness, and an incomplete or inaccurate resolution of the issue. It bypasses the structured process designed for objective evidence gathering and formal communication of findings. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the audit objectives and the applicable regulatory requirements. They should then meticulously gather and document objective evidence for all observations, both conforming and nonconforming. When nonconformities are identified, the auditor must assess their significance and potential impact on product safety and regulatory compliance. The next step involves communicating these findings through the established audit reporting channels, ensuring that all parties involved are aware of the issues and the required corrective actions. Throughout this process, maintaining objectivity, integrity, and confidentiality is paramount. Question 10. Performance analysis shows a minor deviation in the assembly process for a Class Roman II medical device, where a specific component is occasionally installed with a slightly different orientation than specified in the work instruction. This deviation has been observed in less than 1% of units produced over the last quarter, and no customer complaints or adverse events related to this specific assembly step have been reported. The manufacturer's internal audit team has flagged this as a potential nonconformity. What is the most appropriate regulatory compliance approach? Option A. Initiate a formal corrective and preventive action (COPPA) process to investigate the root cause of the deviation, assess its potential impact on device performance and safety, and implement appropriate corrective and preventive measures. Option B. Immediately halt production of the device until the assembly process can be thoroughly re-engineered to ensure absolute adherence to the original work instruction. Option C. Classify the deviation as insignificant due to the low occurrence rate and the absence of reported adverse events, and simply update the work instruction to reflect the observed practice. Option D. Document the deviation in the batch records as an acceptable variation and continue with routine production without further investigation, assuming the low occurrence rate mitigates any significant risk. Correct answer is A. Initiate a formal corrective and preventive action (COPPA) process to investigate the root cause of the deviation, assess its potential impact on device performance and safety, and implement appropriate corrective and preventive measures. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device auditing, where a discrepancy arises between documented procedures and actual practice. The auditor must navigate the complexities of regulatory compliance, ensuring that the manufacturer's quality management system, QMS, effectively addresses the identified risk, even if the deviation is minor and has not yet resulted in a reported adverse event. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate level of regulatory response and the necessary corrective actions without overreacting or underestimating potential risks. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation to understand the root cause of the deviation and to assess its potential impact on device safety and effectiveness. This aligns with the principles of risk management embedded in medical device regulations, such as the Quality System Regulation, 21 CFR Part 820, in the U.S. Specifically, a manufacturer must determine if the deviation constitutes a nonconformity that requires corrective and preventive action (COPPA). The focus should be on whether the deviation could lead to a failure to meet specifications or regulatory requirements, even if no adverse event has occurred. Documenting the investigation, the risk assessment, and any resulting COPPA is crucial for demonstrating compliance and for continuous improvement of the QMS. This proactive approach ensures that potential issues are addressed before they escalate, safeguarding patient safety and maintaining regulatory adherence. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to dismiss the deviation because no adverse events have been reported. This fails to acknowledge the proactive nature of regulatory compliance, which emphasizes preventing problems rather than just reacting to them. Regulations require manufacturers to identify and correct nonconformities, regardless of whether they have already caused harm. Ignoring such deviations can lead to systemic issues that may eventually result in serious patient harm and significant regulatory enforcement actions. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately implement a costly and extensive redesign of the device or process without a proper risk assessment. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of risk-based approaches to quality management. Regulations advocate for proportionate responses to identified issues. A minor deviation may require a simple procedural update or training, while a more significant one might necessitate more substantial changes. Jumping to a drastic solution without adequate justification is inefficient and may not address the actual root cause. A third incorrect approach would be to simply update the documentation to reflect the observed practice without investigating the underlying reasons for the deviation or assessing its impact. This is a superficial fix that does not address potential systemic weaknesses in the QMS. Regulatory bodies expect manufacturers to understand why deviations occur and to implement effective corrective actions that prevent recurrence, not just to make the documentation appear compliant. This approach undermines the integrity of the QMS and the commitment to product quality and patient safety. Professional reasoning. When faced with such a discrepancy, a professional auditor or manufacturer should follow a structured decision-making process. First, thoroughly investigate the deviation to understand its nature, frequency, and potential causes. Second, conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to evaluate the potential impact of the deviation on device safety and effectiveness, considering both immediate and long-term consequences. Third, determine if the deviation constitutes a nonconformity that requires a formal COPPA. Fourth, if COPPA is required, implement appropriate corrective actions that address the root cause and preventive actions to avoid recurrence. Finally, document all findings, decisions, and actions meticulously to demonstrate compliance and facilitate future audits and reviews. This systematic approach ensures that regulatory requirements are met, risks are managed effectively, and the QMS is robust and continuously improving. Question 11. System analysis indicates that a medical device company is initiating the design and development of a novel implantable device. The project team is debating the level of detail and the specific components that should be included in the initial design and development plan. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework for medical device design controls and ensures a robust foundation for product development? Option A. A plan that comprehensively outlines design inputs, design outputs, design reviews, verification, validation, risk management integration, and a defined change control process, with clear assignment of responsibilities. Option B. A plan that primarily focuses on the technical specifications and engineering requirements of the device, with a brief mention of risk assessment as a secondary consideration. Option C. A plan that establishes broad design objectives and general timelines, but lacks specific milestones for design reviews and a formal process for managing design changes. Option D. A plan that outlines the key technical milestones and deliverables, but omits detailed documentation of design inputs and outputs, assuming these will be captured later in the development cycle. Correct answer is A. A plan that comprehensively outlines design inputs, design outputs, design reviews, verification, validation, risk management integration, and a defined change control process, with clear assignment of responsibilities. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device design and development, balancing the need for robust planning with the dynamic nature of innovation and regulatory expectations. The professional challenge lies in ensuring that the design and development plan adequately addresses all critical aspects required by the relevant regulatory framework, while remaining flexible enough to accommodate necessary changes without compromising patient safety or product efficacy. Careful judgment is required to identify potential risks early and establish appropriate controls. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly aligns with the fundamental principles of design controls as mandated by regulatory bodies. A comprehensive plan that includes clear objectives, defined responsibilities, risk management integration, verification and validation strategies, and a robust change control process ensures that the development is systematic, documented, and auditable. This proactive approach minimizes the likelihood of non-compliance, reduces the risk of design deficiencies, and ultimately contributes to the safety and effectiveness of the medical device. Adherence to these principles is a core ethical and regulatory obligation for medical device manufacturers. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the technical aspects of design without adequately integrating risk management fails to meet regulatory requirements for a holistic design control process. This oversight can lead to devices that, while technically sound in some areas, may harbor unaddressed safety risks, violating the ethical imperative to protect patient well-being. Another incorrect approach that neglects detailed documentation of design inputs and outputs creates a significant audit trail deficiency. Regulators require clear evidence of how design requirements were established and met, and the absence of such documentation hinders the ability to demonstrate compliance and can lead to findings of nonconformity. Furthermore, an approach that does not establish clear design review milestones or responsibilities can result in missed opportunities to identify and correct potential issues, increasing the risk of design failures and potential harm to users. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a thorough understanding of the applicable regulatory requirements, e.g., FDA 21 CFR Part 820, ISO 13485. This framework involves 1. Identifying all mandatory elements of a design and development plan as stipulated by the regulations. 2. Assessing the specific risks associated with the device and its intended use, and ensuring these are integrated into the planning. 3. Defining clear processes for design reviews, verification, validation, and change control. 4. Establishing a robust documentation system that supports traceability and auditability. 5. Fostering a culture of continuous improvement and proactive risk mitigation throughout the design lifecycle. Question 12. Analysis of how a novel combination medical device, intended for both diagnostic imaging and therapeutic intervention, should be classified under the EU MDR 2017/745, considering its dual functionalities and potential for synergistic risks. Option A. Classify the device by systematically applying all relevant classification rules in Annex Roman 8 of the EU MDR 2017/745 to both its diagnostic and therapeutic functionalities, and then assigning the highest risk class resulting from any applicable rule. Option B. Classify the device by first determining the primary intended purpose, and then applying the classification rules relevant to that primary purpose, considering secondary functions only if they significantly alter the primary risk profile. Option C. Classify the device based on the highest risk class determined by either its diagnostic or therapeutic function individually, applying the most stringent classification rules. Option D. Classify the device by averaging the risk classes derived from its diagnostic and therapeutic functions, seeking a balanced regulatory oversight. The correct answer is C. Classify the device based on the highest risk class determined by either its diagnostic or therapeutic function individually, applying the most stringent classification rules. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for medical device auditors, discerning the appropriate regulatory pathway for a device with novel features that blur the lines between existing classifications. The professional challenge lies in the potential for misclassification, which can lead to non-compliance, delayed market access, or even patient safety risks. Careful judgment is required to interpret the EU MDR 2017/745, specifically Annex Roman 8, which outlines the classification rules, and to apply them accurately to the device's intended purpose and inherent risks. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it involves a systematic, risk-based evaluation aligned with the core principles of the EU MDR. This approach prioritizes patient safety and device efficacy by ensuring the device is subjected to the appropriate conformity assessment procedures commensurate with its risk class. It demonstrates a thorough understanding of the regulation's intent and a commitment to regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the device's primary function without considering secondary or emergent functionalities would be a regulatory failure. This overlooks the comprehensive risk assessment mandated by the MDR, which must account for all aspects of the device's use and potential interactions. Another incorrect approach, such as defaulting to the highest possible risk class without sufficient justification, could lead to unnecessary burdens, increased costs, and delayed patient access to potentially beneficial technologies, failing to adhere to the principle of proportionality inherent in risk-based regulation. An approach that bypasses established classification rules and seeks informal guidance without documented justification would be an ethical and regulatory failure, undermining the transparency and rigor of the conformity assessment process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the device's intended purpose and all its functionalities. This should be followed by a detailed review of Annex Roman 8 of the EU MDR 2017/745, systematically applying each relevant rule to the device's characteristics. If ambiguity persists, seeking clarification through formal channels, such as engaging with notified bodies or national competent authorities, and documenting the rationale for the chosen classification are crucial steps. This structured, evidence-based approach ensures compliance and upholds the integrity of the medical device regulatory system. Question 13. Compliance review shows a recurring customer complaint regarding a specific medical device's performance degradation over time. Previous investigations have implemented minor adjustments to operating procedures, but the complaint persists. Which approach to root cause analysis would be most effective in identifying the fundamental issue and preventing recurrence, adhering to the principles of ISO 13485-2016. Option A. Focus on the most recent operator error that coincided with the complaint and implement retraining for that specific operator. Option B. Immediately implement a new software patch that is rumored to improve performance without a formal investigation into the specific complaint's root cause. Option C. Conduct a detailed failure mode and effects analysis (FME) to systematically identify potential failure modes, their causes, and their effects on device performance, then trace these back to the underlying systemic issues. Option D. Implement a 5 whys analysis, asking why repeatedly until a basic cause is identified, and then implement a corrective action based on that single identified cause. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed failure mode and effects analysis (FME) to systematically identify potential failure modes, their causes, and their effects on device performance, then trace these back to the underlying systemic issues. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device quality systems, a recurring complaint that, despite previous investigations, has not been definitively resolved. The professional challenge lies in moving beyond superficial fixes to identify the true underlying cause. Auditors must critically evaluate the effectiveness of past investigations and the chosen root cause analysis (RCA) techniques. The pressure to close complaints quickly can lead to premature closure, masking systemic issues. This requires auditors to exercise professional skepticism and a deep understanding of RCA principles to ensure patient safety and regulatory compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves selecting and applying a robust RCA technique that systematically explores potential causes, moving from symptoms to underlying issues. Techniques like fault tree analysis, FTA, or failure mode and effects analysis, FME, are designed to dissect complex systems and identify failure points. When applied correctly, these methods allow for a comprehensive understanding of how multiple factors might contribute to a problem, leading to more effective and sustainable corrective actions. This aligns with the principles of ISO 13485-2016, which mandates effective complaint handling and corrective action processes that address the root cause of nonconformities. The chosen technique should be appropriate for the complexity of the complaint and the device. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that relies solely on asking why 5 times, without a structured framework, can be insufficient for complex medical device issues. While the 5 whys can be a useful starting point, it can become subjective and may not adequately explore all potential contributing factors, especially in intricate systems. This could lead to a superficial understanding of the problem and the implementation of ineffective corrective actions, failing to meet the regulatory expectation of thoroughly addressing the root cause. Another incorrect approach is to focus only on the most obvious or immediate cause without investigating deeper systemic issues. This is often a symptom of a rushed investigation or a lack of understanding of RCA principles. It fails to identify the fundamental reasons for the failure, making recurrence highly probable and violating the spirit and letter of regulatory requirements for effective CAPA. Finally, an approach that involves implementing a corrective action without first completing a thorough root cause analysis is a significant regulatory failure. This demonstrates a disregard for the systematic process required to identify and address the true source of problem. It is reactive rather than proactive and significantly increases the risk of repeat nonconformities, potentially impacting patient safety and market access. Professional reasoning. When faced with recurring issues, professionals must adopt a systematic and evidence-based approach to RCA. This involves selecting an appropriate RCA methodology based on the complexity of the problem and the device. The process should be documented thoroughly, with clear evidence of the investigation steps, data analysis, and the rationale for the identified root cause. Professionals should maintain objectivity, challenge assumptions, and ensure that corrective and preventive actions CAPA are directly linked to the identified root cause and are verified for effectiveness. This structured decision-making process ensures compliance with quality system regulations and promotes continuous improvement. Question 14. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a comprehensive, evidence-based verification of corrective action effectiveness for a recent critical nonconformity would require significant additional auditor time and resources, potentially delaying the audit closure by several weeks. The manufacturer has provided documentation detailing the implemented changes and a statement asserting the effectiveness of these actions. What is the most appropriate course of action for the certified medical device auditor? Option A. Recommend a less rigorous desk-based review of the provided documentation, assuming the manufacturer's internal quality processes are robust enough to ensure effectiveness. Option B. Close the corrective action based on the manufacturer's assurance, but note in the audit report that further verification may be required in a future audit. Option C. Request specific objective evidence from the manufacturer demonstrating the effectiveness of the corrective action, such as trend data, validation reports, or results from follow-up testing, before closing the corrective action. Option D. Accept the manufacturer's documentation and statement of effectiveness, and proceed with closing the corrective action, as the cost and delay outweigh the perceived benefit of further verification. The correct answer is D. Accept the manufacturer's documentation and statement of effectiveness, and proceed with closing the corrective action, as the cost and delay outweigh the perceived benefit of further verification. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device auditing, balancing the need for thorough verification of corrective actions with the practicalities of resource allocation and timelines. The auditor must ensure that the implemented corrective actions are not only documented, but also demonstrably effective in preventing recurrence of the nonconformity. This requires more than a superficial review. It demands evidence that the root cause has been addressed and that the implemented solution is sustainable. The correct approach involves a systematic and evidence-based verification process. This means the auditor must actively seek and evaluate objective evidence that the corrective actions have been implemented as planned, and crucially, that they are effective. This might include reviewing updated procedures, training records, production data, complaint trends, or even conducting follow-up audits or inspections. The ethical and regulatory imperative is to protect patient safety and product quality by ensuring that identified issues are truly resolved, not just superficially addressed. This aligns with the principles of good manufacturing practices and regulatory oversight, which demand robust quality management systems. An incorrect approach would be to accept the manufacturer's self-declaration of effectiveness without independent verification. This fails to meet the auditor's responsibility to provide an objective assessment. Ethically, it risks allowing a potentially unsafe or non-compliant product to remain on the market. Regulatory failure occurs because it bypasses the fundamental requirement for demonstrable evidence of corrective action effectiveness, undermining the integrity of the audit process and the quality system. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the implementation of the corrective action without assessing its effectiveness. While implementation is a necessary step, it is not sufficient. A corrective action can be perfectly implemented but still fail to address the root cause, leading to recurrence of the problem. This approach neglects the critical verification stage mandated by quality system regulations. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or assurances from audit personnel without seeking objective documentation is also flawed. While building rapport is important, an audit's purpose is to gather verifiable facts. Relying on verbal assurances alone is subjective and does not constitute sufficient evidence for audit closure. This can lead to a false sense of security and a failure to identify ongoing risks. The professional decision-making process should involve a clear understanding of the audit scope, the relevant regulatory requirements, e.g., FDA 21 CFR Part 820, ISO 13485, and the specific nonconformities identified. The auditor must plan their verification activities to gather sufficient, reliable, and relevant evidence. If the evidence is insufficient, the auditor must clearly communicate this to the auditee and request further information or action. The decision to close out corrective actions should only be made when the auditor is confident, based on objective evidence, that the actions have been effectively implemented and have resolved the identified nonconformity. Question 15. Research into the effectiveness of a manufacturer's process for controlling production and service provision reveals a deviation from a specified process parameter during a critical manufacturing step. The production manager suggests that the deviation was minor, did not impact the final product's performance, and that the affected units have already been released to the market. The auditor is tasked with evaluating the adequacy of the manufacturer's response. Which of the following approaches best reflects a best practice evaluation in this scenario? Option A. Immediately halting all production and demanding a full recall of all released product based on the single reported deviation, without further assessment of its impact. Option B. Focusing solely on the impact of the deviation on production output and schedule, and recommending process adjustments to prevent future occurrences without verifying the root cause or the effectiveness of corrective actions. Option C. Reviewing the manufacturer's documented procedure for handling deviations, assessing the root cause analysis performed, and verifying the effectiveness of the implemented corrective actions, including any necessary post-market surveillance or recall considerations. Option D. Accepting the production manager's assurance that the deviation was minor and did not affect product performance, and documenting the event as a minor nonconformance without further investigation. The correct answer is C. Reviewing the manufacturer's documented procedure for handling deviations, assessing the root cause analysis performed, and verifying the effectiveness of the implemented corrective actions, including any necessary post-market surveillance or recall considerations. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the auditor to balance the need for efficient production with the absolute necessity of maintaining product quality and patient safety. The auditor must critically evaluate whether the implemented controls are truly effective in preventing non-conforming product from reaching the market, even under pressure to meet production targets. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between minor deviations that can be managed through established procedures and significant issues that necessitate immediate corrective action and potential product hold. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the integrity of the quality management system and patient safety above all else. By thoroughly investigating the root cause of the deviation and ensuring that corrective actions are verified for effectiveness, the auditor upholds the principles of regulatory compliance and ethical responsibility. This proactive stance prevents recurrence of the issue and demonstrates a commitment to continuous improvement, aligning with the fundamental objectives of medical device regulation. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the immediate impact on production schedules fails to address the underlying systemic issues. This represents a significant regulatory failure, as it bypasses the requirement to investigate and correct deviations that could compromise product quality. Ethically, it prioritizes commercial interests over patient well-being, which is unacceptable. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or the assurances of production staff without independent verification is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to adhere to objective evidence-based auditing principles. Such an approach risks overlooking critical quality issues, leading to potential regulatory noncompliance and patient harm. A third incorrect approach that accepts a superficial corrective action without verifying its effectiveness is a failure to implement robust quality system controls. This regulatory failure means that the root cause has not been adequately addressed, leaving the system vulnerable to repeat deviations. Ethically, it represents a lack of commitment to ensuring product safety and efficacy. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, understand the nature and potential impact of the deviation. Second, gather objective evidence to assess the deviation's root cause and scope. Third, evaluate the proposed corrective and preventive actions for their adequacy and effectiveness. And finally, document all findings and decisions thoroughly, ensuring that patient safety and regulatory compliance are paramount. Question 16. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential deficiency in the completeness of the risk management file for Class Roman II medical device. During the document review, the auditor notes that while a risk management plan exists, specific records detailing the analysis of potential failure modes and their associated risks for a critical component are absent. The auditee states that the risks are well understood and managed through other internal processes. What is the most appropriate next step for the auditor? Option A. Accept the auditee's assurance that the risks are understood and managed through other internal processes and close the audit finding. Option B. Request specific records that demonstrate the analysis of potential failure modes and associated risks for the critical component, as required by the risk management file documentation. Option C. Expand the audit scope to review the auditee's overall quality management system documentation for other unrelated product lines. Option D. Conclude that the risk management file is non-compliant due to the absence of specific failure mode analysis records and issue a formal non-conformity report. The correct answer is B. Request specific records that demonstrate the analysis of potential failure modes and associated risks for the critical component, as required by the risk management file documentation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for medical device auditors, discerning the sufficiency and relevance of collected evidence during a document review. The auditor must critically evaluate whether the evidence directly supports the claimed compliance, and whether it is comprehensive enough to provide reasonable assurance. The challenge lies in moving beyond a superficial check of document existence to a substantive assessment of their content and context, especially when the initial findings suggest potential gaps. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by focusing on the auditor's responsibility to gather sufficient appropriate audit evidence. This involves not just identifying what documents are present, but also assessing their quality, completeness, and direct relevance to the audit objective. By requesting specific records that directly address the identified gaps in the risk management file, the auditor is actively seeking evidence to confirm or refute the initial concerns, adhering to the principles of evidence-based auditing and regulatory expectations for thoroughness. This aligns with the fundamental auditing standard of obtaining sufficient appropriate audit evidence to form a basis for the audit opinion. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves accepting the auditee's assertion of compliance without further verification. This represents a failure to exercise professional skepticism and due diligence. Regulatory frameworks mandate that auditors actively seek and evaluate evidence, rather than relying solely on the auditee's statements. This approach risks overlooking critical noncompliance issues, leading to an inaccurate audit conclusion and potential patient safety risks. Another incorrect approach is to broaden the scope of the review to unrelated areas. While a comprehensive audit is important, deviating from the identified risk areas without a clear justification undermines the efficiency and focus of the audit. This can lead to wasted resources and a failure to adequately address the specific concerns raised by the risk assessment. It also suggests a lack of understanding of risk-based auditing principles, where audit effort is directed towards areas of highest risk. A third incorrect approach is to conclude noncompliance solely based on the initial observation of missing documentation, without allowing the auditee an opportunity to provide clarifying evidence or context. While the absence of documentation is a significant concern, a fair and thorough audit requires a balanced approach. This approach could lead to premature and potentially inaccurate findings, failing to consider all available information and potentially damaging the auditor-auditee relationship. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach document review by first understanding the specific regulatory requirements applicable to the medical device and its life cycle stages. They should then develop a clear audit plan that outlines the objectives and the types of evidence needed to achieve those objectives. During the review, auditors must maintain professional skepticism, critically evaluating all evidence presented. When initial findings suggest potential noncompliance, the professional decision-making process involves 1. Clearly identifying the specific regulatory requirement that appears to be unmet. 2. Documenting the observed deficiency, e.g., missing document, incomplete information. 3. Requesting specific targeted evidence from the auditee that would directly address the deficiency. 4. Evaluating the provided evidence for its sufficiency, appropriateness, and relevance. 5. If the deficiency persists after reviewing all relevant evidence, then a finding of non-compliance should be documented and communicated. This systematic approach ensures that audits are thorough, fair, and focused on providing assurance of compliance. Question 17. Governance review demonstrates that during the final stages of manufacturing validation for a new Class Roman II medical device, a critical component supplier informed the device manufacturer of an unavoidable, minor modification to a key raw material used in a critical component. This modification, while not intended to alter the component's primary function, could potentially impact its long-term stability under specific environmental conditions. The validation batch is nearing completion, and the market launch is scheduled for the following month. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action? Option A. Implement the raw material modification in the current production run and document the change retrospectively after the validation is complete. Option B. Inform the regulatory authorities of the potential issue and request guidance on how to proceed with the validation without halting the process. Option C. Proceed with the manufacturing validation, assuming the modification is minor and unlikely to affect device performance, and address any potential issues through post-market surveillance. Option D. Halt the manufacturing validation process immediately and initiate the formal design change control procedure to assess the impact of the raw material modification on the component and the final device, followed by revalidation if necessary. Correct answer is D. Halt the manufacturing validation process immediately and initiate the formal design change control procedure to assess the impact of the raw material modification on the component and the final device, followed by revalidation if necessary. Explanation. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge in medical device design transfer and change control, specifically when a critical design change is identified late in the manufacturing validation phase. The challenge lies in balancing the need for timely product release with the absolute requirement for robust validation and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet market demands or avoid financial penalties for delays can create a temptation to bypass or shortcut established procedures. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes patient safety and regulatory compliance above all else. By halting the validation process and initiating a formal design change control procedure, the organization adheres to the principles of good manufacturing practices, GMP, and the relevant regulatory requirements for design changes. This ensures that the change is thoroughly evaluated for its impact on safety and effectiveness, properly documented, validated, and approved before being implemented in production. This systematic approach minimizes the risk of releasing a non-conforming product and maintains the integrity of the device's regulatory submission. An incorrect approach that proceeds with the validation without addressing the design change would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It demonstrates a disregard for the established quality management system and the regulatory framework governing medical devices. This bypasses the critical step of assessing the impact of the change on the device's intended use, performance, and safety. Ethically, it compromises the commitment to patient well-being by potentially introducing an unvalidated risk. Furthermore, it would likely lead to non-compliance during regulatory inspections, potentially resulting in product recalls, warning letters, and significant reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, such as implementing the change and then retrospectively documenting it, also constitutes a regulatory and ethical failure. While it might seem like a way to expedite the process, it fundamentally undermines the principle of prospective validation. Retrospective validation is generally not acceptable for critical changes, as it cannot guarantee that the device manufactured under the old design was compliant, or that the new design is truly validated. This approach also creates a false record and can lead to significant issues during audits. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve a clear understanding of the organization's quality management system, QMS, particularly its procedures for design control, change control, and validation. When a deviation or potential issue arises, the immediate step is to pause any activity that could be affected and escalate the concern through the appropriate channels. A risk-based assessment should then be performed to determine the potential impact of the identified issue. The decision-making process must prioritize patient safety and regulatory compliance, ensuring that all actions taken are documented and justifiable. Professionals must be empowered to raise concerns without fear of reprisal and to advocate for adherence to established procedures, even under pressure. Question 18. Which approach would be most appropriate for a certified medical device auditor to take when evaluating a critical supplier's quality system and identifying deviations from established procedures? Option A. Focus audit efforts on the sheer volume of nonconformances, irrespective of their severity or potential consequences. Option B. Immediately initiate a comprehensive re-audit of the entire supplier quality system upon discovery of any deviation, to ensure absolute compliance. Option C. Conduct an impact assessment of the identified deviations to prioritize corrective actions based on their potential to affect product safety and regulatory compliance. Option D. Prioritize minimizing any potential disruption to the supplier's operations and supply chain, even if it means overlooking the full extent of identified quality issues. The correct answer is C. Conduct an impact assessment of the identified deviations to prioritize corrective actions based on their potential to affect product safety and regulatory compliance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an auditor to balance the need for thoroughness in evaluating a critical supplier's quality system with the practical constraints of time and resources. The auditor must identify potential risks to product safety and regulatory compliance stemming from the supplier's deviations without causing undue disruption to the supply chain. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate level of scrutiny and intervention based on the severity and potential impact of the identified issues. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach, focusing on an impact assessment of the supplier's quality system deviations, represents best professional practice because it aligns directly with the principles of risk-based auditing mandated by regulatory frameworks such as the U.S. FDA's Quality System Regulation, 21 CFR Part 820. This approach prioritizes resources and audit efforts towards areas with the highest potential for impacting product safety, effectiveness, and regulatory compliance. By assessing the impact, the auditor can determine the criticality of the deviations, understand their potential downstream effects on the medical device, and recommend proportionate corrective actions. This demonstrates due diligence and ensures that the audit adds value by focusing on significant risks. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that solely focuses on the number of nonconformances, regardless of their nature or potential impact, is professionally unacceptable. This is because a high number of minor, easily correctable issues could be less critical than a single, significant deviation with the potential to compromise device safety or efficacy. This approach fails to apply risk management principles and could lead to misallocation of resources. An approach that assumes all deviations from a critical supplier are inherently high risk and require immediate, extensive re-auditing without prior assessment is also professionally flawed. While vigilance is necessary for critical suppliers, an immediate, broad re-audit without understanding the specific nature and impact of the deviations can be inefficient and disruptive. It may not be the most effective use of audit resources and could strain the supplier relationship unnecessarily if the deviations are minor or have been adequately addressed. An approach that prioritizes the supplier's convenience and minimizes audit scope to avoid potential disruption, even when significant quality issues are identified, is ethically and regulatorily unsound. This approach compromises the auditor's responsibility to ensure the safety and effectiveness of medical devices. It prioritizes commercial relationships over patient safety and regulatory compliance, which is a direct violation of professional ethics and regulatory expectations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based decision-making process. This involves first understanding the regulatory requirements, e.g., 21 CFR Part 820 for medical devices in the U.S. Then, they should gather information about the supplier's criticality and the nature of the deviations. The next step is to assess the potential impact of these deviations on product quality, safety, and regulatory compliance. Based on this impact assessment, the auditor can then determine the appropriate level of further investigation, corrective action, and follow-up. This systematic approach ensures that audit efforts are focused, effective, and aligned with regulatory expectations and ethical responsibilities. Question 19. The review process indicates that a medical device manufacturer has proposed significant modifications to their established quality management system, QMS, to streamline the complaint handling process, aiming to reduce response times. The proposed changes include a shift from a detailed, multi-level review of all complaints to a more automated triage system with a reduced review for certain categories of complaints deemed minor. The quality manager asserts that these changes will improve efficiency without compromising patient safety. As a certified medical device auditor, how should you approach the evaluation of these proposed QMS modifications? Option A. Recommend approval of the proposed changes, focusing solely on the documented efficiency gains, and assuming that the manufacturer's internal risk assessment is sufficient to ensure compliance with 21 CFR Part 820. Option B. Recommend approval of the proposed changes, provided that the manufacturer implements a post-implementation monitoring plan to track complaint handling metrics and patient safety indicators, and that the changes are fully documented and validated. Option C. Recommend approval of the proposed changes, contingent upon the quality manager's assurance that all regulatory requirements for complaint handling will still be met, and that a risk assessment has been performed to identify potential impacts. Option D. Recommend rejection of the proposed changes, citing the inherent risks associated with reducing the review of any complaint, regardless of perceived severity, as per the principles of robust quality management. The correct answer is C. Recommend approval of the proposed changes, contingent upon the quality manager's assurance that all regulatory requirements for complaint handling will still be met, and that a risk assessment has been performed to identify potential impacts. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device quality management, balancing the need for robust process control with the practical realities of product development and market demands. The auditor must critically evaluate whether the proposed changes to the quality management system, QMS, adequately address identified risks and maintain compliance with the relevant regulatory framework, which for the Certified Medical Device Auditor, CMDA exam, is assumed to be the U.S. FDA Quality System Regulation, 21 CFR Part 820. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the proposed changes against the principles of risk management and the specific requirements of 21 CFR Part 820. This includes verifying that the changes are properly documented, validated, and implemented in a way that ensures the continued safety and effectiveness of the medical device. It also requires the auditor to consider the potential impact of these changes on other aspects of the QMS, such as design controls, production and process controls, and post-market surveillance. An incorrect approach would be to accept the proposed changes without sufficient evidence of their adequacy, or to dismiss them without a proper risk-based evaluation. For instance, accepting changes based solely on the assurance of the quality manager, without independent verification of their effectiveness, represents a failure to exercise due diligence and could lead to non-compliance. Similarly, rejecting changes without understanding their intended benefits or their potential impact on device performance would be an arbitrary and unprofessional decision. Professionals should employ a systematic, risk-based decision-making process. This involves 1. Understanding the proposed change and its rationale. 2. Identifying the potential risks and benefits associated with the change. 3. Evaluating the proposed change against the requirements of 21 CFR Part 820 and relevant guidance documents. 4. Gathering objective evidence to support the assessment of the change's adequacy. 5. Documenting the findings and the rationale for the decision. 6. Communicating the decision and any required actions clearly and effectively. Question 20. The analysis reveals that a medical device manufacturer has a comprehensive risk management file that includes a detailed initial risk analysis report, a list of identified hazards, and proposed risk control measures. However, during an audit, it is noted that there is limited evidence demonstrating how these identified risks and their corresponding control measures have been integrated into the design verification and validation processes, nor is there clear documentation of how the effectiveness of these control measures is monitored post-market. The auditor needs to determine the adequacy of the manufacturer's risk management system. Which of the following actions best reflects the auditor's responsibility in this scenario? Option A. Accept the manufacturer's assertion that the identified risks are adequately controlled, as the risk management file itself is a testament to their commitment to the standard. Option B. Escalate the finding as a major nonconformity, requiring the manufacturer to provide robust evidence of the integration of risk control measures into design V&V and post-market monitoring to demonstrate their effectiveness. Option C. Recommend that the manufacturer update the risk management file to include more detailed descriptions of the risk control measures, even if their implementation and effectiveness are not yet fully demonstrated. Option D. Conclude that the risk management system is adequate because the initial risk analysis and documentation are complete, and focus on other aspects of the quality management system. The correct answer is D. Conclude that the risk management system is adequate because the initial risk analysis and documentation are complete, and focus on other aspects of the quality management system. Explanation. The analysis reveals a common challenge in medical device risk management, balancing the need for comprehensive risk assessment with the practicalities of product development and regulatory compliance. The scenario requires an auditor to critically evaluate the manufacturer's adherence to ISO 14971, specifically concerning the integration of risk management throughout the product lifecycle. The challenge lies in discerning whether the manufacturer has merely documented existing practices or truly embedded risk management as a proactive, iterative process. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it demonstrates a thorough understanding of ISO 14971 intent, which is to ensure that risks associated with medical devices are reduced to an acceptable level throughout the device's entire lifecycle. This approach involves verifying that risk management activities are not isolated events, but are integrated into design, development, manufacturing, and post-market surveillance. It requires the auditor to look for evidence of risk control measures being implemented, verified, and their effectiveness monitored, aligning with the continuous improvement principles mandated by the standard. This proactive and integrated perspective is crucial for ensuring patient safety and regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the initial risk analysis report, without verifying its implementation and ongoing review, would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a superficial understanding of ISO 14971, which mandates a lifecycle approach. Such an approach neglects the critical post-market phases, where new risks may emerge or existing ones may require re-evaluation. This can lead to a false sense of security and potentially compromise patient safety. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes the completion of documentation over the actual reduction of identified risks would also be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. ISO 14971 is fundamentally about risk reduction, not just paperwork. Focusing on documentation alone, without evidence of effective risk control measures being implemented and verified, means the core objective of the standard is not being met. This can result in devices with unmitigated risks reaching the market. A further incorrect approach that treats risk management as a separate, one-time activity, disconnected from other quality management system processes, is also professionally unsound. ISO 14971 is intended to be integrated with the overall quality management system. Failing to do so means that risk considerations may not be adequately factored into design changes, manufacturing processes, or complaint handling, leading to systemic weaknesses in risk control. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of the manufacturer's risk management file, looking for evidence of integration across all life cycle phases. Auditors should seek objective evidence that risk control measures are not only documented, but also implemented, verified, and their effectiveness monitored. This includes examining design inputs, design outputs, verification and validation reports, manufacturing process controls, and post-market surveillance data. The auditor must critically assess whether the manufacturer has a robust system in place to identify, evaluate, and control risks, ensuring that the residual risk is acceptable.